Welcome to Real Jam Radio. I'm Danny Leroux, your host, and so happy to have you with us for this episode. This is the continuation of my monthly tradition of doing tiers on the first podcast of a month. This is March, so this will be the second to last one. Apologies for a little bit of a delay. This is with Tim Bontemps of the Washington Post. We recorded this on Thursday, where there was a lot going on. Fortunately, not too many major dynamics in the league have shifted between now and then. Very fun conversation, about an hour 20, about where the league is now, where it's going, what we're looking forward to this summer. And two sponsors for this episode. Very excited to welcome SeatGeek to the Real Jam Radio fold. You can check them out at the SeatGeek app. It's my way for buying and selling tickets. And you can enter the promo code REALGM, REALGM, for a $20 rebate on your first order. And then, my old friend, Blue Apron. Blue Apron, the fantastic food delivery service and purveyor of cooking confidence. You can go to blueapron.com/realgm and you can get 3 meals for free, including free shipping on your first order. Again, Tim Bontemps, about an hour 20. Love the conversation. Hope you love it too. Thank you so much for coming on.
Happy to do it, Danny. Looking forward to it, man. This is I remember you telling me before the year you were going to do this idea, and I'm glad I get to do it this time. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, you were a part of the inspiration for it because we did it. With you, it was pretty early in the off season, right?
I believe it was during my cross-country drive.
That sounds right. Oh, yeah, we recorded like 4 podcasts.
Yes, I believe it was part of the cross-country drive. As I was driving through the night to Omaha, Nebraska, we got a bunch of stuff done, and one of them was doing, I believe it was a preseason tier spot, and that led to you deciding to do it during the year, which I thought was a good idea. And like I said, I'm happy to be part of this one. It should be fun.
I decided to focus for myself on this one more on regular season success, because I feel like this is really the last one where we can do that, because once it hit April 1st, it's more about the playoffs. You know, there are teams that'll be on the margins, but really it's afterthoughts. So that was the rationale that I used. And considering all of the things that have happened in the last couple weeks, both trade deadline, injury related, and everything else, there are a lot of different things that I had to think about while parsing all of these different elements and like who fits in where. Were you similarly troubled?
Yeah, I mean, part of this exercise is there's been so much going on my end that I think I'm going to do it kind of off the top of my head on the fly, and I've thought about it a little bit, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot, like you said, between the trade deadline, between certain injuries, I think we're going to probably get to right off the top, between just certain teams playing well, others falling off. It has really been a very eventful, I'd say probably month now in the NBA. Between that and for a lot of teams, what's a very busy March, a lot of teams really have a lot of games going on over the next few weeks. It's going to be pretty fascinating to see from where things are now to where they are at the end of March, how things shake out and how much things change.
Yeah, we'll start with the West, because the West is now substantially more interesting than it was a week ago. And Kevin Durant has a grade 2 MCL sprain. And the basic question, which has been one of the leading ones when I've talked about the West on these for the last 3-4 months, is, are the Warriors by themselves?
I still think so. I know we're recording this on Thursday night after they lost to the Bulls today. I would argue that Steph Curry and Klay Thompson going 3 for 22 from 3 has really nothing to do with Kevin Durant and a lot to do with them just struggling. Steph, I think, is now 4 for 31 last 3 games from 3, which is also abnormal. I don't really see that continuing for the rest of time, so I have a feeling that will sort itself out. And to me, look, is Kevin Durant an amazing player? Of course. Are the Warriors as good as they are with Kevin Durant without him? Of course not. However, I think people have forgotten in some ways that they still have 3 of the top 15 players in the league. Some would argue maybe 3 of the top 10 players in the league. Besides Durant, they're going to be just fine. And I still think if the playoffs started today, obviously the margin for error would be much smaller, and I would not necessarily think it'd be a cakewalk to get to the finals or win a championship. But I certainly think that, in my opinion, they'd be favored against every team in a playoff series, except for possibly Cleveland even still. So I would have them alone at the top of the West, and I don't, unlike other people, I don't really think the sky is completely falling on them.
You have to remember that they're 0-1 since cutting Jose Calderon, so there might have a little bit of a curse on them. But
that's true.
They also lost their first game after cutting Anderson Varejao. I'm one to think, I think they've lost the game after they cut a bunch of different guys. Oh no, they won the game after Briante Weber's last game because that was against the Sixers, but that's against the Sixers. Anyway, speaking from my end, I'm doing it on the regular season. I have them in the same tier as the Spurs just because it's entirely possible to me that the Spurs can make up that margin. It is on kind of the edges of it now, because even if the Warriors are a 50-ish win team without Durant, and I think they're much better than that, it's still a large burden to go over 3 games. But the other big reason is that the Spurs play the Warriors 2 more times. So if they win both those games, then it's more like a 1-game difference. So I'm fine with saying that there's a separation. I'm also, your logic seemed to be more in terms of the playoffs or close to full strength. I agree with that as well. But as a regular season exercise, I think that they're in the same group.
Yeah, I think that that's fair if you want to look at it that way. I'll explain my logic on why I have it separate in a minute when we continue. I think that that's fair, and I think if you want to say that the Spurs are in the same ballpark as them, I mean, look, the Spurs are what, 3 games worse than them? I mean, they're on pace to win 65 games. I think again. I mean, they're an incredible team. So I think that's perfectly fine.
Theoretically, if these two teams played without Durant, I don't know that I've really wrapped my brain around what that would look like, because they haven't played a playoff series since 2013, and both teams are so substantially different.
Well, I have a feeling on how it would go, but I'll get into that when we get into the next section.
Sure. Well, so I guess then my part is I have the Warriors and Spurs together, and then have the Rockets by themselves below that. Do you have those 2 teams together, or do you have each of the 3 separate?
I have those 2 teams together, and I think that the Rockets may have the best chance to beat the Warriors of any team in the NBA in the playoffs.
Interesting.
I am thoroughly fascinated by the Rockets. I think that the Mike D'Antoni experiment in Houston is being done to its fullest potential. I recently wrote a very large and long story about how offense in the NBA has evolved over the last 15 years to kind of now being at its peak right now. And a large part of that story, as you might guess, was talking to Mike D'Antoni about his teams in Phoenix with Steve Nash, and now kind of what he's doing in Houston with James Harden. And towards the end of the piece, I had asked Mike, if we kind of tapped out what we can do offensively right now. And he said, well, I would have said 10 years ago that we'd probably tap things out, and here we are doing better. So I'm not going to necessarily say that. But, the one thing we could do is get down to a game where we have zero mid-range shots. There was a game earlier in the year we had 5 mid-range shots. I'd like to get to 0. Well, earlier this week they played a game where they had 3 mid-range shots in the entire game. And I think that there's a very strong possibility the Rockets will actually have a game this season where they don't have a single mid-range shot. And I think that they're putting up 50 or 60 threes a game, and it's just remarkable to watch. And I think that with James Harden and with all the offensive weapons they have a team that could theoretically go 25 for 60 from 3 in 4 games in a series. And that might be enough to beat Golden State. I think that you have a better chance of doing that and beating Golden State than basically any other way. So to me, this Houston team, I think, is the second best team in the West, even though they don't have as good of a record as the Spurs. I think if they play in the playoffs, I think that the fact that Tony Parker and Pau Gasol are at point guard and center for the Spurs is going to leave San Antonio really vulnerable on defense. I think that both Houston and Golden State can really exploit that. So I actually think that Houston right now will make the conference finals and play, just in my opinion, an epic slugfest against the Warriors. Even if they don't win the series, and even if they only win, say, 1 game, I think the games are just going to be, 135 to 130, just absolute slobber knockers, like that game, a double overtime game in Oakland back in November between these 2 teams. And I really think that Houston team is legit. So that's why I was kind of waiting for this section, because I think, to me, it's, if I was ranking them in order of, I think, in terms of talent in the West and like to where things stand right now, I actually think it's Golden State, Houston, San Antonio, with Houston and San Antonio in their own second tier.
That's fascinating, and there's a lot that I agree with there. Also, 2 other factors that you didn't mention that I'm sure are considerations for you is that Houston's defensive talent is a little bit underrated. They're not necessarily bringing it every night, but they have guys that can defend. Like, they have Trevor Ariza.
Patrick Beverley, Trevor Ariza, and Clint Capella are all excellent defenders.
Yeah, and also their bench is not perfect, but monstrous in the way that a playoff run can go, because they have players that can sustain their offense and just are a pain in the ass for defenses. And that's all you really need at that point. You know, it's great if you can have some specialists and have some players who can step into the starting lineup or in case of an injury, but Lou Williams, Eric Gordon, Sam Decker, their center rotation, like they have a lot of talent that it's okay if you reduce their minutes, but they're still going to make an impact.
No, I totally agree. I think they're going to be monsters. And frankly, I think that team next year, when you look ahead, I mean, let's assume everybody stays healthy. You know, Golden State could lose several pieces off this team this year. Zaza Pachulia could get a payday. David West could retire. Andre Iguodala and Sean Livingston could have to move on. All that's very realistic. And, you know, if it's Golden State with 4 guys and a bunch of scrubs against, like you just listed off, 9 or 10 guys on this Houston team, that probably a lot of them are just going to get better, too. I mean, they don't have a lot of old guys. They, I think, could be neck and neck with them next season. I'm very high on Houston, and I think that, you know, I really, over the last month, I've gotten more and more excited about a possible series, and I just think that would be an utterly fascinating conference finals. So from a neutral standpoint, I would really love to see that, and I would like it to happen. So, like I said, to go back to the very beginning, that's why I have Houston and San Antonio in a tier by themselves in tier 2.
We're also looking a lot more at that potential Spurs-Rockets series, just as those two teams are getting more comfortable. The Rockets are basically locked into the 3 at this point. I mean, it's just that's really what things are. And yeah, the Spurs could actually jump up to the 1 line and change that dynamic. But I think it's good so you have kind of that sealed off with the Rockets at the 3, you know, outside chance they move in one direction or the other, but I doubt it. So you go from there to the awkward morass that is the rest of the Western Conference from 4 to 7. And in terms of the regular season, I have those 4 teams together. I fully expected the Clippers and Jazz to separate themselves. They haven't yet. I think when I do this a month from now, they will have, but they have not yet. So I'm going to have all 4 of them together for right now.
Yeah, I think you kind of have to have them all in a group. I agree with you. I think Cleveland. I think the Clippers and the Jazz are a level above Memphis and Oklahoma City. But the bottom line is they're all within, I think, 2 games right now or 3 games. Like you kind of have to look at them as a group and say, all right, well, until further notice, these teams are all in the same group, and you know it's up to the Clippers and the Jazz to prove that they're on another level. And frankly, I'm starting to wonder if they are. I mean, I'm not so sure that a month from now they're going to separate. I mean, you know, look, the Clippers have had some injuries, but I mean, it's also at this point, like, when are they gonna take that step? I mean, they should have, I think, by now. And if they haven't done it by now, maybe they're just not going to do it. Maybe they just don't have the horses. I mean, kind of the same thing with Utah. They've had some injuries, but you know, they haven't had a ton of injuries. They still certainly, I think, have a pretty significant amount more talent than Memphis and Oklahoma City when you consider that Memphis has gotten literally nothing from Chandler Parsons, and Oklahoma City, as we've talked about really all year, has, you know, quite a few issues outside of Russell Westbrook. So, you know, from my standpoint, you know, I think they all deserve to be in the same tier, and it will take a lot, I think, for me to really be convinced that needs to change anytime before the end of the regular season.
Right now, how are you feeling about OKC versus Memphis right now? Well, so as we're recording this, they're a half game apart, but if Oklahoma City ends up beating Portland, which is going on as we record this, then they'll be tied. I was originally leaning very heavily towards Memphis. I like their team better and everything else, but Oklahoma City improved pretty substantially at the deadline in a way that makes them more dangerous.
Yeah, I actually think that I would lean Oklahoma City. I think Russell Westbrook is going to be healthy. I think that's a factor. You look at guys like Mike Conley, Marcus Gasol, they're older guys who can break down. Thunder have a lot of younger guys. In general, you'd expect them. I know Victor Oladipo's hurt right now, but in general, you would expect them to be healthy. So I think that's a factor. And I just think if you look at them, I think you have to consider the fact that they're younger and deeper than Memphis in a lot of ways. Like I said, they've got nothing from Chandler Parsons. They're running Vince Carter out there. I mean, to me, it won't shock me at all after that trade if Thunder wind up in the 6th seed. And it wouldn't even shock me that much if they wound up in the 5 seed. I agree with you. I think Taj Gibson and going to Oklahoma City for very little, really. I mean, they traded Campaign, who maybe he's going to be a nice player, but the bottom line is if you have Russell Westbrook on your team, he's not playing. And you upgrade on the wing with, Doug McDermott, a guy who can shoot the ball at the very least, which some Oklahoma City needs, and you go get Taj Gibson, who, is a starting caliber power forward for a team that wasn't starting one. Even though I think Domantas Sabonis is good, he wasn't a starting caliber power forward right now. I think you look at that combination, you have to really look at them and say, hey, that's a team that's a lot better. And, I think the chances of them finishing in that 6th seed, I think have substantially increased.
You filled in for me doing the Twitter NBA show with Nate when I was gone for the trade deadline, and that was the trade that dumbfounded me most, just because the Chicago had pieces in Taj and Doug McDermott that were imperfect, but made sense for a lot of different teams. And they decided to cash them in. I don't have that much of an opposition to that in the abstract, especially because I didn't think they were going to re-sign Gibson. But using those to get just Cameron Payne is dumbfounding, because I've watched a lot of Cameron Payne the last couple of years, and there certainly is potential. He's only 22, turns 23 this summer, but they bought on him as being the answer when we haven't seen that definitively so far, especially not this year.
Yeah, I think the Bulls have gotten a little unfairly maligned for this trade. I mean, look, they weren't going to re-sign McDermott. Or not re-sign McDermott. They weren't going to re-sign Gibson. So I think that is something that has to be considered. I know that they tried to find trade options for Gibson, and they didn't really have a lot there for them, which I think is surprising. But my understanding, it wasn't like there was a first-round pick out there that they could have got that they didn't get. So if you look at it that way, it's like, all right, we're not going to re-sign this guy. They clearly decided they were out on McDermott. I mean, to me, if you trade McDermott for Payne, is anybody looking at that thinking it's a bad trade? I don't really think so. So I think if you kind of look at it from a standpoint where, all right, we couldn't get anything for Taj, we'd like to get a first for him. We couldn't get someone to give us one. Let's turn him into something, as opposed to like they did the year before, letting Pau Gasol walk as a free agent, not getting anything for him. I think in their eyes, it's like, all right, we can get Bobby Portis some minutes. We can try some other guys, and we can bring in a guy in campaign who we like a lot. So I agree with you. I thought they could have got. I didn't like the trade that much, but the more reporting I've done on it, the more I've heard that they just didn't seem to have the kind of traction on Gibson that I expected. I think that getting something for him as opposed to just hanging on to him, letting him walk, is better than nothing.
The two teams that I think about in that context and would be very frustrated if they didn't offer first are Boston is A1, not with the Nets picks, obviously, those are way too strong, but their own 2018 for Taj, which was a deal we did in the mock deadline. I think that makes a lot of sense. And Utah has 2 late first-round picks this year that are just there. They already have so many guys on their roster, and yeah, I know they wouldn't want to make Boris Diaw or Trey Lyles or whatever unhappy. He would have helped them so much just by being another stable rotation player. And Utah, I understand that for a long time they wanted to maintain their payroll flexibility, the idea of renegotiating George Hill, which I was a supporter of, assuming he was amenable to it, and they maintain that flexibility for a good reason. And the nature of the trade deadline is that it occurs about a week this year. It was usually about 2 weeks before the extension deadline. But that means you just have to have your ducks in a row. And they sat on that space, sat on 2 late first-round picks, which maybe they can use to either just draft guys or to move up in the draft. It's not like those are wasted at this point. But they had all of these assets, and as of now, in a year where they could make some real traction, they did not get enough for them. So they still have the opportunity to do something with it, but it feels like a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah, I agree on both counts. I think it was a really bad job by the Celtics. I think they definitely should have went and got Gibson. I think it would have made him a lot better. And I agree on Utah. I think at some point you have to just wonder if that team just is fine not spending money. I mean, I feel like every year they're short of the salary cap. This year they claim they were saving money to do the renegotiation and extension. They didn't get that done. I feel like if you're going to do that, you should know what the number's going to be. If you're going into that, you should have an idea if you can get that done or not. And to me, it's either a bad job of not knowing how much money it's going to take and not being able to get it done, or just simply not offering it then and getting it done that way. But look, I can promise you, I think if you called the Bulls at 2:45 on last Thursday and said, we're going to, we've got a first, hey, it's Utah here, we're going to offer you a first-round pick for Taj, I think they would have done it. Like, I don't think it's a feint. I think it's let's go get a guy we like for this guy, for McDermott, who we don't like, clearly, at this point, as opposed to just sitting on him and losing him for nothing. So I think if you look at it from that standpoint, I think that trade is a lot more defendable than I think a lot of people gave it credit for in the first place. Well, yeah, and I should add, all that being said, I think it's a great trade for Oklahoma City, terrific trade, and I do think it's really helped them a lot.
Yeah, I think it's helped them immediately. It's given them just so much help, and it took away Donovan's, whether it was his impetus or front office, I don't know, that playing Sabonis, who is not...
I think you could probably guess.
Yeah.
I think you could probably guess the impetus
I was being polite. But if you kind of take that away from them and add in a much better player, whether he actually starts or just plays a lot of minutes and comes off the bench, like it just makes everything so much easier. It makes everything work for them. And McDermott, I mean, they needed spacing in the worst way, so they can make it work. And they're still an imperfect team. They were always going to be an imperfect team, but they're more versatile now, and I think that they can win. They can win more ways. And that certainly makes them better in the regular season, but also makes them a little bit more potent in the playoffs. And that's where I actually wanted to go with this. So it's certainly not set, especially now with Durant's injury, that the Spurs and Rockets will be the 2 and the 3. But for the sake of this exercise, let's do it that way. If we were to say that the Spurs and Rockets are the 2 and the 3, and then the Grizzlies and Thunder are the 6 and 7 in either order, which set of series would you rather see? Would you rather see Spurs Thunder and Rockets Grizzlies, or would you rather see Spurs Grizzlies and Rockets Thunder?
It's a great question. I can't really decide. I kind of don't want to see Memphis play anybody, and I kind of want to see the Thunder play both. I guess. Now I feel bad saying that because I do enjoy Memphis, but they're just kind of this Memphis team. It's kind of like the Clippers, right? Like we've seen them, this same iteration of this team so many times at this point that it's kind of like I know what I'm getting, right? So I kind of want to see something new. I guess the series you want to see is Rockets Thunder, right? Like the Harden Westbrook thing. That would probably be pretty fascinating. I think the Spurs would probably throttle the Thunder even with Taj, just the way they're built. I just think it'd probably be tough for them. So, and Memphis will be interesting. They're kind of the big matchup there. So I guess that would be my choice. I would San Antonio, Memphis, and Oklahoma City, Houston. What about you?
I lean that way, though I do think a Rockets-Grizzlies series would be fascinating. It's the challenge of Tony Allen.
The contrast in styles. Yeah, contrast in styles would be pretty great,
Contrast in styles, Tony Allen trying to have that definitive late-career series against Harden, which has not been his best matchup in the past, but to see that would be fun.
By the way, if the Thunder win this game, they're a half game behind the Clippers.
Yeah.
Tied with Memphis.
If they win
one game behind the Utah Jazz. It's not inconceivable that the Clippers are the 7th seed.
Yeah.
It's really not.
If you want to talk about a series, that's the first round series that I would most want to see in the West if it were possible, is Clippers Spurs.
Spurs Clippers. Yeah, if I could lay it out, I think Clippers Spurs, Thunder Rockets,
and then the Rock
Grizzlies,
fight.
Jazz. Yes, and then the Rock fight, I think, would probably be the way I would like it to play out. I think if I had to pick a scenario.
Poor Jazz.
But yeah, that's the thing about this Clipper team, man. Look, at this point, I'm not convinced that this is going to end very well. I haven't, they've had good stretches this year and they're a good team, but I'm not convinced they're going to be able to separate themselves. But like you said, at some point you have to just go, well, they haven't done it yet, so they're not going to. I mean, we are 60 games into the season now. I mean, it's hard to, even though they have had some injuries, it's hard to look at these teams and think they're anything but a finished product at this point.
About 14 months ago, I wrote a piece advocating for the Clippers to trade Chris Paul. And a part of my rationale was that I was looking into the future and said, if they value championships, which was one of the premises that a lot of people lost when I wrote that piece, was that, doing that. Yeah. But basically what it was we know what they are, and what they are is fine, but it's not championship relevant. It's just a team that can win a round or two and get knocked out. And if Steve Ballmer is okay with that, there's no shame in it. I have no opposition to a team, especially one that is already expensive, going through that route. But if they didn't want that, if that wasn't the future that they were interested in, that the time was to strike then. And the part I didn't include in the piece, which was implied, was they should also consider trading Blake Griffin at the same time. And now we're seeing really how that comes into play, because the Clippers they're a good team. They're a fine team. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're not going to ever be better than they are right now unless they fundamentally retool, and they're going to get really expensive and very immobile soon too, because now we know what the CBA is. We know where this is going. If they re-sign both of those guys, CP and Blake, especially if they re-sign JJ, which I would expect they would do if they do the other two, this is their team for the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, and I don't think, most people in the league think JJ's gone too. So,
wow.
I think that, I'm not gonna guarantee that, but the prevailing thought is that he will not be back with the Clippers. Mostly because
they're going to be
worse
too because they need him.
Well, right. And if you look at that team, like if you're paying both Blake and Chris $35 million or close, which is, whether it's if you're paying 135 or 132, whatever the difference is. I mean, those two and DeAndre, you're up at over $90 million right away, and that's before you factor in anything else. So, I agree with you. I think that they're at a real crossroads, and this summer they're ground zero in the NBA this summer in most fascinating teams because, look, let's say it is Clippers Spurs in the first round. Let's say that happened. Or let's say it's either way. Let's say it's them or the Rockets, right? Let's say the Clippers lose to one of those teams in the first round. If you're Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, are you signing up for that again? Are you saying, all right, well, we just didn't get lucky this time? At some point, when does somebody there just go, you know what? This isn't working. The fascinating thing there is if one of those guys says sayonara there, which a lot of people there don't think is possible, and I'm not saying it even is possible, but, if one of those or both those guys decide to go somewhere, that team is in huge trouble. Because as you know, they've traded picks. They don't have any flexibility roster-wise. They are just stuck. And it would be really fascinating to see what happened if that took place. So, depending on how this year goes for them, I think that they are, one of the most fascinating teams to potentially, pay attention to as we get into the summer and see what they do.
They are also the ultimate turning the keys on the submarine team because losing one of those two does not make it possible to replace the other. So, and if I were either of them, for me, they would have to have an open conversation because if one of them says they're leaving, I would not want to stay because that team just isn't going to be that good. They'll be fine, but if the Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan show would be worth watching. They'd be a playoff team, but they wouldn't be a great playoff team. It'd be probably better than the Blazers, but not that much better than the Blazers. And they can get guys for the minimum, but they're not going to get anybody nearly as good as Blake Griffin.
Yeah, no, it's a very fascinating spot, and and JJ's really good. If they lose him, that's a significant blow too. They're in a really fascinating spot, and I don't know how it's going to play out. I'll be very fascinated to see what happens.
My other question with them, and this can't be resolved at this point, is if they re-sign both of them, and let's say next season goes like we both expect, would DeAndre consider leaving? Because he can opt out. The benefit of the kind of contract that he signed was it was a 3+1. And while it seems like that was like that just happened yesterday, that was almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, I know. And I would think, I think that's definitely possible. He could leave the next summer. There's a lot of things in play there. It's a very fascinating situation, and it's like I said, it's one that I'm really having my eye on between now and the summer because they have a lot of directions they can go. And and even if they keep the band together, even if they keep the band together plus JJ, I think they wouldn't be that good going forward because they have a lot of guys that are in their 30s, and it's just a group that I think destined to kind of tail off. But it would be pretty fascinating to see if they decide to keep that core together. If they don't re-sign JJ, if other people leave, it could go a lot of directions between now and July.
Certainly could. Tim and I will get back to the Western Conference in just a moment, but I need to tell you about the new sponsor of Real Jam Radio, but a sponsor that I am very familiar with and enjoy quite a bit, which is SeatGeek. SeatGeek is my personal way of buying and selling tickets and has been for quite a while before they were a sponsor of any of my podcasts, and the reason why is because it is a great service. So they are able to save you time and money by being an aggregator. So that means you don't have to go combing around the internet looking at various ticket sites to find the right tickets. That's a big part of it. But another one, and as somebody who knows the business really well, buying and selling tickets used to be what I did for a living before actually I started sports writing full time. And what SeatGeek does through their algorithms is that they give a deal score, and the deal score tries to combine ticket quality and the price to say, these are the best tickets, these will give you the best bang for your buck. And I have a lot of confidence in my ability to discern this. I made a living doing it, especially venues in the Bay Area where I live that I know well, not only for sports, but also for concerts. And what I kept on finding, I challenge myself with these sorts of things, is that their deal score was nailing it. And while I still do incorporate my own judgment. I can't say definitively that I lean on them entirely because I have too much ego to do that. They do an amazing job. And also on top of that, I know whenever people try to use a new thing, they worry about it. Tickets are fully guaranteed. So you can shop on SeatGeek, you can buy tickets with confidence that they'll make it happen. And also, as I said, you can go all over the map with it. It's not just sports. Entertainment in all varieties is a great way to do it. Theater, I haven't used SeatGeek for theater yet, but I actually really want to in the near future. There are a couple shows that are coming around. The other reason why it's great to try out SeatGeek now if you haven't already, is to use the promo code. So what you do is you download the SeatGeek app, SeatGeek, and then you go to the settings tab and you do add a promo code. The promo code, it's easy to remember. I try to do it for all Real GM radio podcasts. It's Real GM, the name of the site that I write for, the site that I've written for since 2009, Real GM Radio, the podcast you're listening to. When you do that and you enter the promo code, the first time you make a purchase, which was to an event that you were going to go to anyway, they give you $20 back as a rebate. So it's a thank you for using the site, and it's $20 free for you. It tells them that you came from us, and it's a way into an app that I personally use all the time. So again, that is the SeatGeek app. You enter the promo code REALGM, REALGM, and you get $20 back on your first order. Now back to Mr. Tim Bontemps and the rest of our conversation. We're halfway through the Western Conference in terms of number of teams, 7 and 8, close enough. So I'll run through the 8 teams that are left, and then we can talk about how to divvy them up. Nuggets, Blazers, Timberwolves, Dallas Mavericks, Sacramento Kings, New Orleans Pelicans, Suns, and Lakers. And do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first in terms of how to kind of?
I think it's probably 4 and 4. I'd probably go the top 14. I don't remember exactly the order. I would say Sacramento, New Orleans, the Phoenix, and the Lakers are at the bottom, and then the other 4 in a group above them. And I would say that's probably the way I'd divide it up.
That I have the same differentiation, except I do draw a little bit of a line between the Sacramento and New Orleans and then the Suns and Lakers, where it's like the low, slim to no chance of making the playoffs, and then the dead and no chance of making the playoffs. Like that
right. That's probably fair. I think if you go 4-2-2, that's probably fair.
So then we can focus on the 4 teams that are in that, slim, that are in the chances of getting the 8th seed. And the best way to do it is, what are you thinking is the order in terms of most to least likely of making the playoffs, and how are you feeling about each one of those teams? To repeat it for clarity, it's Denver, Portland, Minnesota, Dallas.
I think it's Denver, Portland, Dallas, Minnesota in that order. I think Denver's very strong favorites to make that spot. They have I think the most talent. They're the healthiest, I think, as of now. And I just think that, if I look at them, I think they have the best path to it. I think all of them are pretty flawed. I think all of them are roadkill for whoever's the 1 seed, whether it's the Spurs or the Warriors. I think they get routed in the first round, no matter who it is. For all the people that want to talk about how fun the Nuggets are, I think they are quite fun. They also play literally no defense, including Nikola Jokic, their young center, who I think is very good. But I also think people just completely gloss over the fact that he's one of the worst defensive players in the league, and just really just can't stop anybody. Which to me, it's one thing. I've kind of coined the DFL thing about Isaiah Thomas, and I'm pretty open about the fact where I think Isaiah Thomas' defense is, but. It's one thing to have a guard that doesn't stop anybody, like James Harden or Russell Westbrook or Isaiah Thomas. It's another thing when your center doesn't stop anybody. So I think that long-term is something Denver has to look at. But they're a very fun team. He's an incredibly fun player. And I just think that, they always have a good home court advantage with the altitude. And I just think between now and the end of the season, if I had to pick, I would say that Denver is a pretty strong favorite to get that 8th seed.
There's such a parallel between the Nuggets this year and the Blazers last year, where they are outperforming expectations, talented team, hadn't really done it before in this configuration, but that surprise leads some people to get a little bit too rosy about where they are now. Like, the difference between the Blazers and the Nuggets is that this Nuggets team is young and cheap, and the Blazers team was a little bit older and was about to become more expensive, which is now what has happened this year as the bloom has kind of gone off that rose. So I'm not selling on the Nuggets' future. I'm a believer in the Nuggets' future, though I do worry about Jokic in the same way that you do. The poster child for this right now is DeMarcus Cousins. I mean, there is It is very hard to build a successful defensive team around a center who is not capable on that end. I think Jokic can get to... I think he can get to passable pretty easily, but I think he can get to league average or maybe even a little bit above that because he's a smart guy. But he's going to have to play with energy on that end. Like, that's the energy and intelligence is really going to be where the line is. Marc Gasol can be like his shining light on the hill of like what you can do with limited athleticism, but a lot of intelligence and energy and communication. I don't think he's going to get there, but you could use that as an example. But the Nuggets have more of an open floor plan to really figure out how they're going to work around that. And in this year, people who listen to this podcast will know this. Like, I always thought this was the Blazers' spot to lose because they just have more talent than everybody else, but they're just not figuring it out. And I have reached the point, especially now with the Nuggets having a 3-game lead as we record this, it could go to 2.5 or 3.5. I just have to kind of sit there and go, well, if they haven't figured it out now, then why am I relying on this prior when we're starting to build a mountain of evidence that, at least for the time being, should take precedence?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, they are what they are, and I don't see that changing. So for me, I think that it's Denver, and I think pretty significantly.
Dallas and Minnesota are kind of in the same boat where they've been surprising. It's more surprising in some ways for me with Dallas because Dallas traded away some of their good, or let some of their good guys go. But you never want to sell off a team because they're not that far behind that if they just go on a little bit of a crazy run, kind of like an NFL team that wins their last 4 games, that can still make it in. But I would say both of those, it's like a 5% or less chance at this point.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I would say you've got that spot on.
Anything else in the West that you think is notable that is a part of the kind of figuring out the tiers at this point? Anything you're looking forward to seeing over the next few weeks?
I mean, I guess if we want to talk about the Cousins and Davis experiment, but I think that's been pretty well covered. And I frankly think that team doesn't have a chance of really doing much this year at this point. So I don't know how much we really want to get into that unless you want to try to do some kind of a look ahead. Otherwise, I don't really have anything to say about the other 3 teams. I think they're just biding time until the end of the season at this point.
The only thing I want to say is you talked about how the Clippers are the most interesting team to you for the offseason, and they're certainly high on my list. I haven't really thought about if
there are a few of them, but I have a feeling I know which one you're going to mention.
But this is not a team, but a player. Drew Holiday has a really big decision in front of him because he fits in well a lot of different places, and the difference between him and a lot of the other high-end point guards, and there are a lot of them in this free agent class. I mean, we expect a lot of them to stay where they are, but they exist. Is that he's not in a perfect situation. So it's not George Hill debating between the Jazz and the Knicks or whatever other teams you want to think about. I could totally see Drew Holiday looking at some of the other options and going, especially if the money's even or close to even, and going, no, that sounds better. He never chose to join the Pelicans. He signed that extension with the Sixers and then was traded there before the extension kicked in. And I'm not sure that playing with DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis together would be the most fun thing for a point guard. I mean, it depends. It's a lot of personality. It's a lot of gameplay fit, but he is going to get about a month to figure out, is this how I want to spend the next few years of my life? Yeah, no, it's very true. I think it's just going to come down to him getting a lot of money and deciding to stay. But yeah, I think it's possible he could leave and he could get a lot of money from a lot of places. I mean, there's going to be a lot of teams that are interested in him. He's a heck of a player. So, and if he leaves, that could set up a lot of other dominoes because if he leaves, they can't really replace him, and then they're stuck with Anthony Davis and Boogie Cousins, everybody getting the ball, and it could be a big snowball effect. So he is another guy that's interesting. You're going to mention the Lakers just because of all the stuff they have going on this summer, but there's a lot. The most interesting pick protection in the league. I mean, that situation is just absolutely bonkers. There's a lot. There's all kinds of stuff going on. It's going to be a really fascinating offseason on a lot of levels. I mean, there's a lot of teams that are at a crossroads for a lot of different reasons. I think it's going to be. I think we could look like obviously last summer with KD was pretty big for a lot of reasons, but I think we could look back on 2017 as an incredibly consequential season for a lot of reasons between a lot of these choices these teams have plus the draft. I mean, I think which is supposed to be your draft. I think. It could really be a consequential, 6 weeks between mid-June and August. we could see as much as a third of the league point to this offseason as the one that really separated them as either being in that bottom group for a long time or not. And that is true of teams like the Lakers that have kind of weird flexibility. The Suns, they're going to have to figure out what's going on with their whole team. Just a lot. Sacramento is probably going to be in a holding pattern for another year. This could be definitive for the Sixers. There are just so many teams in that area that are going to have both opportunities, and that means the opportunity to make mistakes as well. So the Knicks largely cast their lot last year, and there are a couple teams like that really did it. But last year was more about solidifying teams in the middle. This year, I think, is more about teams at the bottom and then on the fringes of contention.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. I mean, there's a lot. It's going to be fun on the court between now and then, but it's going to be even more fun. It's going to be even more fun this summer, I think, when, especially with the new CBA kicking in. I mean, it's a lot of stuff to sort out.
We'll start out the East. I assume we're going to go in the same direction with that, with a team that does not have as much of a thing to deal with this summer, and that's the Brooklyn Nets, just because they don't have their pick and we don't know who's going to take their money. But do you have anybody else with them at kind of the bottom of the East?
Trying to think.
I just think their record is so much worse. Like, there are other teams. They have to be by themselves. They have to be. The next group can be more teams. You're 100% right. They have to be by themselves. Nobody else is close. Yeah. So they're my tier 7 by themselves, and then I actually put the Sixers in tier 6 by themselves, largely after the dual hits of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid being out for the rest of the year, because they're hopeless for this year in terms of record, but they have more banked wins than the Nets, so they get to be a little bit separate.
Yeah, I actually would put the Knicks, Sixers, and Magic all in one group. I think they're all hopeless, and the Sixers obviously lost Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons recently, but I think all those teams are going to start just falling apart between now and the end of the season, and it's going to be mostly a race to see who can lose more games from that group.
And considering those teams are only a couple, I guess we'll use the word behind the Lakers and the Suns, we could see one or two of those fall in and start to make this a real interesting thing in the lottery, because I don't know that the Lakers are cohesive enough to just actively try to lose at this point. And the Suns are in a different boat as well. So if we start to see the Lakers and Suns creep up to like 20 or 22 wins, and then those other teams are just like right there, I'm going to get really excited.
I mean, it would be pretty great. I could definitely sign up for that. That would be a tankathon involving the Laker pick would be pretty great. Be pretty great.
And then, of course, the Sixers having not only their own ping pong balls, but the Kings ping pong balls adds another level of intrigue, because then they are the ones who get the Lakers pick if they happen to be the team that gets jumped. Not that they necessarily have to be, but yeah, all that's going to be absolutely bonkers. And so I think that's fair. I still have the Knicks and Magic a little bit separate, just because their talent, I just think they're a little bit better, but that might just be unfair. It might be functionally no different at this point.
Yeah, that's the way I look at it. And then I would have the four teams, I think, fighting for the 8th spot: Charlotte, Milwaukee, Miami, and Detroit, all in a group together in the next tier for me.
I had the Bucks in a separate one below, just because I'm not really a believer in it. They haven't, since Jabari went out, they've won some games, but they haven't really won games against good teams. Like they beat the Suns, they beat the Nets. And then, other than that, it was in mid-February they beat the Pistons and the Pacers. So I'm not totally writing them out yet, but they're awfully close.
Yeah, I just look at all those teams as the same. I mean, I think your points are right. I just think all those other teams have been pretty bad too. So
that's true.
It's more that I just look at all of them in kind of a similar fashion, and I don't think anybody deserves to be above the other. So I just have them all clumped together in one big group. I mean, it's kind of like the bottom of the West, where I just, these teams all stink. So it's just kind of a way of grouping together how they stink, and then moving on beyond it.
I banged the drum on the Hornets for a while because I was a believer in their talent. I still think Steve Clifford is a great coach. And then you see what has happened to them the last little while. Tonight they lost to the Phoenix Suns, who obviously are not particularly good. Actually, yeah, I mean, they lost by 17 to the Suns. And it's just sitting there going, what is this? I mean, yeah, I understand why they were hurt without Cody Zeller. Zeller is one of these guys in the league that has become strangely important, largely because of the absence of substitutes. But he's also a good player. Like I don't want to diss Cody Zeller by saying he's not good. He is, but he's more valuable because of the replacements. He's back now. I mean, maybe he's not 100%, but he's back now, and they're still not exactly inspiring hope.
Yeah, no, they're not good. I mean, they're not good, and I don't see it changing. So yeah, I mean, I feel pretty comfortable in that, and that's why, like I said, I have those four teams up through 11 through 8 all in one group together.
And I haven't drawn up a list yet, but I would like to draw a little thing of the kind of the teams that we already feel are hopeless, wherever we want to draw that line. So definitely the very bottom of each conference, of how often those teams play each other, because those games will actually end up being really important considering how closely clustered a lot of these are right now.
No, I agree. I mean, that a lot of this is going to come down to who plays who. And that's part of why I think Denver's going to be in good shape. They have a very, very soft schedule, especially early on here. So that's why I've liked them. And, I haven't looked at it in the East, but probably whoever plays the worst schedule will probably be the team that gets in the end, because they're, it's really just kind of going to be a race to not screw it up as opposed to a race to actually get in.
For bad teams, I generally look at wins, and for good teams, I look at losses, because that's, you can bank the other side a lot more easily. That's kind of the point. And there are 8 teams right now with 24, 25, or 26 wins. That is a ton of teams that haven't separated themselves. And then if you add in the ones that are the teams, Philly and Orlando, that are at 22, which I think are a little bit separate, there's a lot of movement that will really affect it, especially for those who believe that, that there are tiers in this draft. Maybe you have Markelle Fultz separate, but having the 5th pick and having the 12th pick are hugely different things.
Yeah. No, and I think that's why you're right, and that it's going to be a very interesting final. Like when we get to about March 20th and everybody kind of starts to see where it's going to be at, I think we could have an epic tankathon, over the final 3 weeks to try to, get yourself in the best position possible. So it'll be fascinating to see how that shakes out and who winds up where.
Going to take a quick break from the basketball talk to tell you all about Blue Apron. For those of you who've listened to the podcast for a while or listened to Dunc'd On, because Nate and I talk about it a lot, I am a huge fan of Blue Apron for a wide variety of reasons. And as somebody who just went on a trip and had the benefit of not having to cook at all and eating good food, I realized how much I missed that experience. The idea of being able to pick the meals on Blue Apron, look at it ahead of time. I was just looking, I always do it a couple weeks ahead. There's a spiced chicken dish that looks awesome, Za'atar spiced chicken, and then some crispy cod sandwiches, because the seafood is always really a highlight with Blue Apron. I'm not the biggest seafood fan normally, but it's always so fresh and so good that I really do look forward to it. And I get to have that experience again now, being home and getting to do that. And so Blue Apron is a highlight, it's not only being able to pick the dishes, but being able to cook and to eat them. And it's a great way of enjoying good food at a reasonable price. And if you enjoy cooking, all the better for it. If you enjoy eating good food, it's also really well portioned, so there isn't food waste. And if you're not somebody who likes cooking very often, you don't have to get excess of various ingredients. They give you everything really well portioned and already there. So if it's more of like the kind of accessories or accoutrements that come with a dish, you don't have to worry about buying a bunch of celery or buying a bunch of spices or anything like that. It comes with everything that you need. And another reason that I really enjoy Blue Apron in terms of Real GM Radio is that the way you can try it is really interesting. So you can get up to 3 meals for free on your first order, and that includes free shipping. So my hope is always that you will try it out and that you will like it as much as I do. I came into Blue Apron a little bit blind. I knew what they were, but I was blown away early on, and it has continued to impress me, building up a repertoire, an actual binder that I have of dishes, not only that I enjoy eating, but that I'm comfortable making and modifying moving forward. So you can do all of that with Blue Apron. You go to blueapron.com/realgm, just like Real GM Radio, the podcast, and you can get 3 meals for free, including free shipping. Again, that is blueapron.com/realgm. So your team is kind of in the 8 seed mix. That's the Heat, the Pistons, the Hornets, and the Bucks?
Yep.
So then do you have the Pacers, Hawks, and Bulls together, or do you see a separation anywhere in there?
Pacers and Bulls.
Okay, so Pacers and Bulls above the Hawks?
No. Pacers and Bulls together.
Okay.
Below the top 5.
Okay. That's fair. I actually have I think the Pacers and Hawks, I have them above the Bulls. I just don't trust the Bulls at all, personally. They're probably going to be in the playoffs, but...
Yeah, I think that's fair. I just think them and Indiana are very similar. They both basically have one star and then a bunch of, obviously they'd rather have Miles Turner than anybody on the Bulls, but the Bulls probably have, I think, better players overall that I like besides that. So I just think they're both about the same.
Nate has brought up the point before, and I think this is very fair, about how the first couple weeks of the season were very unfair to Jeff Teague's reputation because he was just bad early on, and he's been a lot better since. And I think that's been a big difference for them. Also figuring out, of course, that Monte Ellis is not a part of the rotation. I mean, at least the starting lineup has resolved a lot of their issues just because Teague is a good player, but he's not a great defender, and so putting somebody of normal size next to him made that a lot more passable, and it helped a lot of the just kind of the ecosystem of their starting 5 work better. So I trust them the most, actually. I trust them more than the Hawks, personally. That doesn't mean they'll necessarily finish with a better record, because the Hawks already have a banked advantage of, I think it's 3.5 games right now, and that's a lot to make up, even if you feel that the Pacers are better. So that's kind of, I could see that being different, but I like the Pacers, and they also feed into the ideas, because I think of the teams that are almost definitely going to be in the bottom 4 of the Eastern Conference playoff picture, the Pacers are the team I would want to play the least.
Maybe. I think Atlanta's pretty good. But, I mean, I could see what you're saying about the Pacers. I mean, look, Paul George is really good. So you saw last year they almost beat Toronto in the series. I wouldn't necessarily sign up to play them. But I think Atlanta's on another level than both those teams, frankly. And I think, they had that one stretch where they were very bad, or in December, where I think they went 1-10. Other than that, they've been a very good team really all season. So I think they're on another level than those teams.
I've also been thinking over the last few weeks, because there's been a point, and I agree with the premise that Atlanta's point differential is not nearly as strong as you would expect with a team, at their record. But what I've been kind of working with the idea right now, the last couple weeks, is the idea that they're the new Memphis. So Memphis had a great defense, and their offense was incredibly shaky. This is more before this year, but it's still broadly true. And what happens when you have a great defense and a bad offense is that you either play close games, which you often win, or you get blown out. And those teams are going to outperform their point differential. And those trouble signs are there. I understand why the people who say, a team that it puts a gravity on it, that a team with that sort of a situation just generally doesn't sustain that kind of success. But I can understand why they would defy that a little bit with their talent.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's, and I think they're a little different teams. I think that's a good comparison to them in Memphis, and a reason why they are similar.
I wonder at the same point. So we talked a little bit in the earlier part about some different players and how they could potentially use the rest of this season to think about things. Chris Paul is a great example of this. Paul Millsap is another. Millsap is not a player who will by himself decide a championship. He's not that kind of a player, but he's really good. And what he decides to do, whether he decides to take the most money, choose a situation where he can win a championship, whatever he's going to do, is exceedingly important, especially considering this could be the second year in a row where the Hawks lose an all-star for nothing. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that's, they're another one of these teams that's a bit of a crossroads point, and they could have traded Paul and didn't. And if he decides to leave this summer, they, like you said, they go from having him and Al Horford both to not having either of them in 2 years without anything to show for it. It wouldn't look great.
Thinking out loud, this could also be the summer that brings back sign-in trades a little bit, just because the last couple of years there's been so much flexibility that sign-in trades were useless. There wasn't really that much of a benefit. Now we're starting to get to a point where players of a certain caliber could want to go to teams that don't have space. And I think it's possible that we see that maybe with Millsap, maybe with a couple other guys, just because we have more teams on each side of the ledger at this point.
Yeah, no, I agree. I I feel boring that I just keep agreeing with your points,
but at the same point, I don't know. But at the same point, I don't know who it is. In other years, you could see, oh, look at this team, they're good, but they don't have the space. And also because that leads to a hard cap, so it's not like Portland can do it or a lot of these other teams. It is a somewhat narrow window, but usually I could when that kind of when I think of that sort of an idea, it's almost always inspired by a specific team. Oh, look at the Knicks or whoever else, and that isn't the way this is. It's just in the abstract. It's well, the good teams don't have space, so maybe one of the good teams will do that. But it's not like the Warriors could do it. The Spurs theoretically could, but won't. That's another. If Paul, I think it was it Jeff McDonald who kind of casually mentioned that that Pal's probably going to opt in, but it's that would totally change their offseason, considering San Antonio's they could do that, other situations they could do. But it's so strange to have this idea that makes sense, but then not have teams identified. Washington's not going to do it either.
Yeah, you wouldn't think so. I mean, it's possible, but we wouldn't think so. So yeah, no, it'll be. I think you're right. It will be very interesting to see where he ends up, but. He's definitely one of those chess pieces. He's just one of many chess pieces this summer that could really change the game depending on where he winds up.
Are there any destinations that you think are particularly interesting or worthwhile for him?
I mean, I think Minnesota and Denver are both teams that are going to make a run at him. I think you could look, the Lakers, I think they're going to try to spend their money on somebody this summer. They want to have an all-star, so if they don't trade for one, I should see them going after him. You look at teams like the Knicks or teams like the Heat, you look at teams like, I don't think Detroit will have the money, but I think you could look around, and I think a lot of teams will be trying to find the ways to get their hands on it, maybe Chicago. I think there's a lot of teams that will look at Paul as a guy they want to try to bring in, and a contract probably won't look great in a couple of years, but I don't think they'll stop anyone from trying to sign him now.
I bet Phoenix is going to try to sign him too, even though they have a million power forwards.
No, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
At all.
Somebody's going to offer him the money that makes it untenable, just like what happened with Horford. It's going to make it untenable for if Atlanta tries to play hardball. And I'm not saying, you're going to be Atlanta, you're stupid if you don't offer him a full 5-year max. I'm not saying that at all. But it gets a lot harder to hold that position if you're getting a 4-year max or close to it from either one team or multiple teams.
Yeah, I think so too, especially when you consider how much that max is going to be. I mean, it's really going to be tough. It's really going to be tough for some teams to swallow that pill and do it. So, like I said, I keep saying it, but this summer is going to be, I think, even more interesting than last summer. It's last summer, everybody had money. So, there was just stuff was just going to happen. And, people can say there were bad deals done now, but there was just there was no way to avoid that. Now, this summer, there are a lot of consequential people in the market and a lot of teams. And as we've said several times, in these kind of, inflection point situations where a lot can change. And it'll be, I just think it's really going to be, I really think it could be one of those years that we remember for a long time for, really shaping, like you said, maybe a third of the teams in the league in the way they are going forward.
That also will be the question of, in terms of who is the next team to trade a star, or at least a star adjacent type of guy, because this, if Boston is really going to start throwing some stuff out there, I don't think we're going to see a better set of assets available for a guy of, let's say, Paul George or Jimmy Butler's caliber than what Boston has, as long as they're actually going to throw those guys in an offer.
Yeah, I think so too. I think Paul George could very easily wind up on the Lakers, because I could see them say, we need to have an all-star. We're hosting the all-star game next year. I could see that being Genie Buss's mandate. So I could see him there. But look, there's a lot of teams with pieces. You could have Denver get back in the mix. You could have Minnesota get back in the mix for some of these guys. There's going to be a lot. I'm just so fascinated by this stuff. There's just so many things on the table. DeMarcus could even get back on the table. Let's say Drew Holiday leaves. Maybe the Pelicans turn around and say, well, this was a good try, but, we don't like the vibe we're getting from DeMarcus. We should turn around and move him somewhere. There's just a lot. Maybe most of it won't happen. Maybe all these guys will stay put and we'll just kind of roll it back over. But I just think there's a lot of potential for a lot of things to change. And I just think from our standpoint, as people who kind of follow the inner workings of the league and the ins and outs of transactions and things moving around, I think it's got a chance to be really fascinating.
Indiana is at the epicenter of a lot of this, because we end up focusing, and I've written at length about this and for various other teams in the past, about the hardest decisions that general managers have to make. And if they, if we're starting to sit here in mid-June and the Pacers are basically what they are, and Paul George has not seemed amenable to agreeing to an extension or whatever it's going to be, there are not many harder spots as a GM than either A, being Larry Bird and having to figure out whether to trade him or if so to trade him for, but also for any team other than the Lakers to say, what are we willing to give up? Because there is a very decent chance that we are going to spend that next year, however good we are, sweating bullets that he's going to leave.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and that's just another.
Like, would you have that's the same reason why I would have considered trading him now if I were Indiana. But also, this situation just changed because now, if Durant's injury forces him out of an All-NBA team, and Paul George all of a sudden gets third team, your whole world changes.
Yeah, I don't personally anticipate that happening, but who knows? It could. I mean, it really could.
Yeah, it could, and I think that they're more likely to be willing to offer it than the Jazz are with Gordon Hayward. I don't see if Gordon Hayward also is it's really complicated for how he would be eligible because he would technically have to opt in.
He would have to opt in. I think if he wouldn't. I think if they wouldn't offer him that, he would leave, frankly. So I think the Jazz will offer him whatever it takes to re-sign him. But that's just my opinion.
It's good to know. So we're down to the final.
Well, to me, it's like to me with that, it's you're the Utah Jazz. Like, what are you doing? If you're not going to pay him, like, who are you going to pay? So that's the way I look at that. It's just I just don't think that's going to be an issue personally. And I actually have Atlanta and Toronto in the same group.
Interesting, because of the Lowry injury.
Yeah, I think that's a significant development. It's not guaranteed Lowry's going to be back by the time the playoffs start. It's not guaranteed he's going to be healthy by the time the playoffs start. And unlike say Kevin Durant with the Warriors, they don't have the margin for error, and I think they could very easily not be hosting that series. It could be starting in Atlanta. And do I think that Toronto wins the series? Still probably if Lowry's healthy, but I am definitely not convinced that it's a sure thing.
Their ownership and Masai and everybody else just has to be so nervous because they're dealing with just so many moving parts. Because when I heard about the Lowry injury, the first thing I thought was, how the hell are they going to figure this out? Because Serge Ibaka is a pending free agent, and they might get 10 games, if they're lucky, to figure out whether Lowry, DeRozan, and Serge Ibaka is...
Well, they're not. They're not. I mean, they're not getting 10 games. I mean, they haven't... So far, they've had none, and I think that they'll be lucky... I mean, I guess you've gotten playoffs, but I'm
right. I am.
They're going to get, yeah. Okay, so maybe in the playoffs, but yeah, they might not get a single regular season game to figure that out, which is obviously not ideal.
They might not get a single playoff game if Lowry doesn't come back full strength.
Right. Yeah, they might not.
And so what would they do with that? And then this ties in with something you and I have talked about privately a series of times, which there is this assumption from various levels of people, whether it's casual fans or media members, that if they re-sign Serge Ibaka, then they can figure out something to do with Valanciunas. And Valanciunas is on a reasonable contract. I'm not saying anything otherwise. But spending as much time as I have fake trading centers around the league, you realize how few destinations any non-elite center, especially a non-elite center that is on an 8-figure contract, can really have, because there just aren't that many teams that are sitting there going, oh man, we need that guy, and we're going to give up, even if we're not giving up many assets, just to make it happen.
I kind of disagree with Valanciunas. I think because to me, if you're trading him, they're probably trading him to just get rid of the money, and I think they could get rid of his money pretty easily. Especially in a summer where there are going to be a decent amount of teams with some cap space, and let's say a team like Sacramento Kings that doesn't have a lot of assets. I mean, you could get. I'm not saying they get a ton back for him, but I think they could. I think if they decide to move Valanciunas to get off that money, I think they could do it kind of easily. Even though it's not that long of a deal, he's only making, I think, $16 a year for 3 more years. It's pretty reasonable. I think they could find a home for him if they need to, and we have talked about that. To your point, I don't know if you're getting value. I think getting any kind of value is tough, but I think if you just try to get off that money and give them away for pretty much it's not like Mozgov and Deng saying in with the Lakers, right, where you can't move that money, or Joakim Noah with the Knicks, or even somebody like Yamahimi, who I think is a better player than those guys with Washington. Like those are contracts it's going to be very difficult and not impossible to move. Whereas I think that Valanciunas is somebody that could be moved if they decided they need to get off that money and save a little. I think they could find a home for him.
They also would probably, if part of the goal is to get out of the luxury tax or reduce the luxury tax bill more accurately, they would want to make that move in the summer because it's just functionally hard, especially now where the salary cap is staying about the same. There are just going to be fewer teams with a boatload of available space once we get into the season. So they would have to be very proactive in that. They certainly could be. I mean, I can understand why they would be, but another moving piece that could make a lot of this more interesting.
Yeah, no, very true. Very true.
So we're sitting there now. So you have the Raptors below, and I have the Raptors at the bottom of my tier 2. But so either way, that's a pretty small distinction. 3 teams left: Cavs, Celtics, Wizards. How do you split that? I could see multiple configurations that are totally fair.
Yeah, I have the Cavs alone, and then Boston and Washington in their own tier together.
For the regular season only, I have it the other way. I have the Cavs and Celtics together, and the Wizards separate. But if we were talking about the playoffs, I would agree with you and have it the same way.
Yeah, I think that's fair too. I think Boston's a better regular season team than they are a playoff team, and I think Washington will be better than them in the playoffs. So I think that's a pretty accurate balance.
Would you like? I'm intrigued by that theoretical Washington-Boston as a playoff series. I think that could be fun. Oh,
that's what I want. I think it'd be fantastic. I mean, if you Isaiah Thomas and Jay Crowder both can't shut up. John Wall and Bradley Beal can't shut up. Both teams hate each other. There's Marcus Smart will say crap too. I mean, there's just a lot of people who will run their mouths and a lot of bad blood on both sides there. There's already been some feisty games. The Wizards had that ridiculous black outfit game, which, I mean, ironically, may have kind of jump-started their season because people really, I don't remember exactly what the record was, but people really got on. It might have been early January. People really got on them at that point, like making fun of them for doing that. But, I mean, they won that game pretty handily and have really never looked back and have been, really, they've had the best record in the East for, over 3 months now. I mean, they've been outstanding.
I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you very well could be right because that was right around the same time that the Wizards figured out they won that game going away, which was not that big a surprise. So they won that game and they went to 25-20. That was that win pushed them to 25-20. Now they are 36-23.
Yeah, they were 18-18, I believe, and now they've gone 18-5 since then. Which
is awesome. I've been waiting for the Wizards to kind of figure it out for a few years, and no better time to figure it out than when you have no more options left.
Yeah, no, and again, this is a team that hasn't really won anything ever, and so if they could, they're locked in with this core, but they've got a bunch of young guys, and they should be able to grow together for a while, and should be really good. So it should be fun to see.
Hasn't really won anything ever applies to almost every District of Columbia sports team other than the football team, which has won a couple.
Yes, I know.
It is amazing how there is that kind of that parallel.
Nobody.
Like the Caps were fascinating, but never really won anything. The Wizards, of course, have been in that boat. Though if we're talking about the Bullets, then you get they've mostly just stunk though. I mean they had some good years in the 70s. I mean they haven't won more than I think 48 games since 1977 when they won the championship, or 78. I mean it's like Yeah. I mean, they've been. I mean, they basically. It's the parallels between them and the Warriors are pretty fascinating up until about 5 years ago, and now the Wizards are starting to have a bit of a renaissance themselves, and with John Wall and Bradley Beal and Otto Porter, they should be really good for a while. I mean, they shouldn't be going anywhere. So, but yeah, I would have them in Boston and tier, and then I still think that Cleveland. Assuming everybody comes back healthy, I think Cleveland's a pretty significant step ahead of everybody else. Yep, so they've won 46 games in 14-15, but other than that, they haven't won 45 or more since 77.
Yeah, that's it. And I don't know if they've been higher than a 5 seed since then either.
That's interesting because I think Basketball Reference does it in terms of division seed, not overall. And they haven't made the Eastern Conference Finals at the bare minimum since 79.
Yeah, it's been a barren stretch. It's been a very barren stretch.
Oh, sorry. I should mention
DC...
they haven't done those things since 79, not 77. 79 they won 54 games. Yeah.
Right. Since the 70s, they have never won more than 46 games, and that was only once. And never, other than that, they've been over 45, and they've never made it past the second round of the playoffs. And to your point, no DC team has made it to the conference championship in any sport in 20 years. So,
wow.
If the Wizards could break through and get to the conference finals, it would be pretty huge for them on a variety of levels, and pretty huge for the city here where I'm at now.
It's a pretty amazing circumstance, and so then it all boils down to Cleveland, and they're in this super weird holding pattern because we all know how good they are. There isn't any ambiguity in terms of that. They're the defending champions. They're an awesome team when they put everything together. And I guess the only real question that I have is, will the rest of the guys, the still breathing guys, stay healthy? And how many of the players that are out would they theoretically need in order to win the East? And I think that answer is very low.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think they're still pretty far ahead.
Boston is, I understand why they kept the powder dry, but what keeping the powder dry really did, and yes, they did beat the Cavs last night, is that it just made it that much more comfortable for Cleveland to just have an overwhelmingly likely chance of making the NBA Finals. And I understand why you don't want to give up that much for this year, because Boston was never going to change that entirely. Cleveland was always going to be the favorite, but I don't know, it is a little bit less interesting to just kind of, even if they're going through the motions, that going through the motions is probably enough.
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, as long as Kevin Love and J.R. Smith come back healthy, I think that they are, prohibitive favorites to get back to the finals.
Hey, if Chris Anderson comes back, it can help him too. Even though he's not on the team anymore.
Chris Anderson would help quite a bit.
This is such a strange stretch because, well, I mean, other than the Durant thing, which is, of course, its own storyline, the intrigue is just in weird places. Some of it's at the bottom of the lottery. Some of it is these kind of mid teams like the Wizards and the Celtics trying to figure it out, who are, they're not really title contenders, but they're certainly relevant. And I don't know that we'll find any definitive answers on that kind of stuff in the next month, but I'm sure that we will find a lot of movement, and that movement will tell us something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right on that. I think it's going to be a fascinating month, and it will, like you said, by the time we get to about March 20th, we're going to start to know where these teams stand, and then we're going to start to see the tankathon start. And it's going to be, for a lot of reasons, from injury standpoints to tanking to playoff positioning, it's going to be, I think, a really fascinating final 6 weeks.
Nate and I do this. Actually, it usually does it sometimes coincides with the months that we've been bad about doing awards at the right times this year. But one thing that we like to do is kind of like a player and a team that you'll be watching for the next time. It doesn't have to be the next month. It can be whatever. For you, as somebody who watches the whole league, do you have anything off the top of your head of like a player and a team that you're going to be interested in for the next little while?
I'm fascinated to watch that Clipper team to see where they end up, because they, more than maybe any other team, are really desperate to finally make a playoff run. I'm pretty fascinated to see what happens with the Warriors, obviously, without Durant. I think they've gotten way more interesting. I'd rather have them be healthy and not be interesting, but they're way more interesting now. And I think Toronto is really interesting for the same reason. Without Kyle Lowry, we'll see how the Raptors do. I think that those are three teams that have a lot of moving parts going on right now, and I'll be very curious to see how they're able to navigate these next few weeks.
I don't have a specific team in mind, but I have two players, and they're both big men who change zip codes. And it's not DeMarcus Cousins. I mean, he's what he is. Serge Ibaka in Toronto, as you kind of were going at before. Even without Kyle Lowry, I want to see how that works, see how Dwayne Casey uses him. And then Nerlens in Dallas, because he ended up getting traded to a team that I could see being very interested in him as a free agent. And having somebody's restricted rights and giving somebody an offer sheet are very, very different things. And so what will having him for this 2 months mean to those negotiations, mean to what he does? Because I think purely on a basketball perspective, as long as he doesn't go to the wrong airport again, I think that he will fit in very well, especially as long as when Dirk plays. Like I think he's closer to the archetype of what they should be looking for in that role man defensive center. He's not Tyson Chandler, but he's good at what he does, and so I want to see how that works now, and then kind of think in my head about how that affects this summer, because Dallas is another team that is always in the mix for stuff. They always make things more interesting, even if they don't end up getting the final result.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And like you said, we'll see if Nerlens can make it on time to the airport in the future. But, that's definitely a guy that, you could see them paying. And, it'll be very interesting to see how he plays. I guess the other guy I'd be curious about is Jahlil Okafor is a complete train wreck, as he has been the last few games going forward. Now he's got a chance to play more. But, that's just looking like a lost cause at this point, at least in Philadelphia. I think that's a guy that really needs a change of scenery, and maybe it won't work, but I think that him in Philadelphia probably run its course at this point.
I had talked it, and I joked probably even maybe with you during that car trip about how Jahlil Okafor would make sense on the Kings after they gave up on DeMarcus Cousins, and I still feel that way. Like that, if that would be a decent place for a reclamation project, can sop up some possessions. I mean, I don't know what the Sixers are going to be thinking in July and June of what they want for him, but I hope that he can go somewhere where he gets the coaching and the support where it makes sense, because I feel like he's going to get outplayed by Richaun Holmes for the next month, and I have no idea what that does to his psyche. I have no idea what that does to the new management psyche, but that whole situation is really, really interesting as well, because the teams that compel me the most when we talk about an offseason are teams with variability and teams with upside. And the Sixers have both. They could be quite good in a couple of years if everything works out, but they have so many possibilities open to them.
Yep, they really do. And, they're another one of these teams with a lot on the line this summer with the Laker pick. And I think they're going to make a run at Kyle Lowry and some other big-name players, try to spend some of their money. They've got to try to get Ben Simmons healthy. They've got to try to get Joel Embiid healthy. They may, they eventually have to have contract extension negotiation with Joel Embiid. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot to bite off there, too. And it'll be fun to see how it plays out.
Thank you so much for taking time. It was a pleasure doing this with you again.
No problem, man. Looking forward to seeing you next week back in the Bay for the Warriors-Celtics showdown.
Oh, actually, that leads to one other thing. Like, I was thinking about how funny it would be if the Clippers, because I think everybody pretty much feels that the Warriors are their worst matchup. And if the Clippers ended up basically falling out of the 4-5, which has always been kind of the worst case scenario for them, was being in that 4-5, facing the Warriors in the second round, and then the Spurs jumped the Warriors, and so that's the 2-7. So it's like, hey, congratulations!
That would be hilarious.
Congratulations! You got exactly what you didn't want.
That would be a hilarious outcome. That really would be. I mean, if that somehow happened, it'd be pretty amazing if it did.
And we wouldn't have to travel that much, so that would be fun.
That would definitely be good.
Yeah,
I'm all for that.
But thanks again, and take care.
Sounds good, buddy. Thank you.
Thanks again to Tim Bontemps for taking the time. You can read him at The Washington Post, and you can follow him on Twitter at Tim Bontemps. That's TIMBONTEMPS. Such a great sport for coming on. He was actually on the East Coast last week doing various pieces of work, which I had forgotten when I asked him to do the show and thought we were in the same time zone, but we were able to make it happen because he's awesome. So you should read his work anyway, but if you want to support him just because he's a really good guy. And he's also doing a weekly newsletter now. You can check that out. I believe he has it all on his Twitter account, so you can check it there. As always, thrilled to be a part of the CLNS radio family. It's a great way to listen to this show and so many other good ones, and they're building their roster out all the time, including Game Theory podcast of my friend and great Real Jam Radio guest Sam Vecini. I actually did his show last week. We talked a little bit about the injuries that are going on in the league, and so you can check out CLNS Radio. They have a free app. It's a great way to listen to podcasts. And if you want to support this show, there are a lot of different ways you can do it. You can leave a rating, leave a review in the podcast player of your choosing. To be pragmatic, it's great if it's iTunes. It still is a large figure in the field, but really whatever it is. Also, you can subscribe. Great for Real Gym Radio because the day of the week is completely random. And you can also just download every episode. Whether you listen to it or not, I want you to listen to every episode. It makes me happy. But even if you don't, that is a really big way to help. And then the other absolutely massive thing you can do is check out our sponsors. SeatGeek for this one, free mobile app, buying and selling tickets. Use the promo code REALGM and you get $20 off your first order. I use it all the time. I have for a long time. Great way of buying and selling tickets. And then also you can check out Blue Apron. If you haven't used it already, then I don't really know what else to tell you other than what I already have, because I'm a big fan of it, and I only have so many different ways that I can say that, but I'm a big believer in it. It's something I look forward to every week. BlueApron.com/RealGM, 3 meals for free, including free shipping. So those are great ways to support the show. and keep it moving. I'm lucky enough to have sponsors, lucky enough to make money doing this, and I do really enjoy it. And part of the reason this took longer to put together is because I have already recorded the next Real GM Radio. It is with Nathaniel Friedman, formerly of Free Darko, and it's an amazing conversation. It happened really spur of the moment, and it goes in a lot of different directions. I haven't even started editing it yet. It's going to be an absolute monster, but I mean that in a good way. So that will come out whenever I get the time to do it. My instinct is Wednesday night, Thursday morning. I make no promises, but you can check that out as well. It's a great reason to subscribe because the episodes come out at weird times. That is the nature of my life and the nature of what I do. You can, of course, also check out my work at Real GM, at The Sporting News, at The Athletic, podcasting work, Dunc'd On Basketball Podcast, Twitter NBA Show, and Locked On Warriors. So I go in a lot of different directions, busy, and have other things that you don't know about, which is a lot of fun. So working on those as well, and everything else. And Twitter NBA Show will be back actually after the next episode airs, so I'm not going to promo it as hard, but have all those things going, and really do appreciate all of the support. It's invaluable. It means a lot. You can send any feedback, good, bad, indifferent, to DannyLeroux@gmail.com, at Danny Leroux on Twitter. If you take the time to write it, I will take the time to read it. I might not take the time to respond. I always try to, but I make no promises. That's just the way it works for me. I'm very candid about it. But I appreciate all of that, and it does go into making the show better. And I think that your feedback has been integral to all of that kind of stuff. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen. Thank you for taking the time to respond. Take care, and make it a great day.